Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to General Services Committee of the 16th of January. And first of all, I will start with item 1. Any apologies for absence?
No, Chair.
No, Chair. And then item 2, minutes of the previous agenda on January the 4th. Is there any comments for anyone who's there? Okay, and we accept the comments? Yep. Thank you. In the minutes, thank you. Right. I've accepted no items for urgent business. So we'll move on to item 4, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest for the item for tonight's discussion tonight? Not me. Okay, then we'll move straight to item 5, pay policy. Has all members seen, and sorry for the delay, it was backwards and forwards, but read and understood the pay policy we're discussing tonight? Fantastic. Well, is it? Could we move to presenting the pay policy report?
Thank you, Chair. Although I'm quite happy for John to do it if he wants to. But reiterating Mark's apologies, I do apologise for the late distribution of the report. The negotiation. Is that better? Wow. Yes, apologies for the late distribution of the report and agreeing to discuss this tonight. Essentially, the report is asking General Services Committee to consider whether to amend in year our existing pay policy. Our pay policy was approved at Council in February, and as part of that pay policy statement, we allocated 2.5% and 2.25% as pay increases to staff employed under our Thurrock scale. At the time, the national negotiations were complex. There were ballots for industrial action, and it was very unclear at the time when any of that would be concluded. The discussions went on throughout most of last year, and the NJC agreement was finally concluded in November, and at that point what was agreed nationally was to apply a rate of £1,925 to each pay point, and also to implement a minimum pay point of £10.50. Now that is significantly different in percentage terms than what has been applied to the Thurrock pay scales as at the 1st of April. There's been considerable debate, and the formal position of the trade unions we're currently at is they have all formally requested the Council to implement the national award, essentially asking us to reopen pay negotiations and recognise the complexity of what went on through the year. The report sets out lots of information and lots of detail in terms of the pay policy and our collective agreement. I'm not intending to go into detail on that in part of the introduction, but I'm happy to explain any, respond to any questions or explain any of the complexities of the current collective agreement that we're operating under, which I think it's worth reminding, we're currently in year 4, and we go into the final year of the collective agreement next year. Within that context, we've considered the options that are available, because one of the key considerations that we have to make as a council is obviously we've issued a section 114, and the cost of implementing the NJC award, replacing our current award with the NJC award, is in excess of 2.7 million, and in the current year that is unbudgeted, so it becomes an additional pressure. I think the finances are well set out in the report, but again, I'm happy to respond to any queries or questions that the committee would have. The 3 options, simply put, are implement the award, and that would mean us revising our current pay scales and implementing that revision back to the 1st of April 22. That would respond, obviously, to the request of the trade unions. It would provide the workforce with a pay increase that matches the national position in the current year, but obviously comes with significant financial costs that we would have to look at how to mitigate those, and it's obviously unbudgeted. The second option is to defer. Under our collective agreement, we are not required to match the national award in year. The agreement requires us to match the general increases over the period of 5 years that the agreement exists. So that potentially we've met the requirement for this year, and could defer the increase to next year. There's obviously consequences to that, and I think I've set most of them out in the report, but I'm again happy to go into more detail. I've had no formal notification of a ballot. I've had one informal notification of a ballot from one of the trade unions, and the other two have verbally indicated that we would potentially be in dispute should we take that route and defer. The third option is partial implementation. This is set out in the report, is probably the most complex. Our collective agreement contains within it a requirement to implement pay increases across the whole of the Thurrock banding. To actually split that would require some negotiation with the trade unions. There's obviously a timing issue with that, and that could be more complex. We're also working in the context that the intention is to bring next year's pay policy as normal to February Council. So if we're in negotiation or dispute about the current year, then obviously next year's is also made more complicated by that. The arrangements we're setting out in this report do not apply to the senior management bands, and I hope that's clear in the report. There's no intention to revisit those or reassess if there's any additional requirement for senior pay scales. I think in summary, Chair, that's probably the sort of the overview of the position, the overview of the report, and some of the information about collective agreement. But I'm happy to answer questions and provide any more information that sort of facilitates your considerations.
Thank you very much. I think I'll take my opportunity as chair to mention and to start the conversation of, obviously, I've got some questions that outside that, but we'll come back to that. I think we actually decide what we're doing on the three options first and have a conversation. But my personal view, and I'll start the conversation, is that defer is just not an option that we should be looking into at this point. I think that the staff here in this building, especially the staff that I mentioned, if we go to a part view, are not to blame in these issues that we're at the moment and should not be penalised in any way, shape or form. So I will start that in that view and that to frame that conversation of that, I think, but I don't know if we, but I'm happy to take other conversations and any comments about that before that. But I've got some questions maybe I'll leave to the end after the conversation about the pay, what we do here, because there's some issues about our pay policy and how late this is, whatever happens, and we should be implementing at a speed, making sure that you don't have to wait for the pay policy for nearly a year late is just unacceptable. But any comments first? Councillor Kent.
Chair, I would agree with that. Of the three options that we have, you're right, deferring isn't reasonable, and a partial implementation, I just think, opens up so many cans of worms that we really don't want to go there. I think it's only right that we recommend to council, if that's what we're doing tonight, the first option, implementing the NJC award in year. I know that creates difficulties, but you know what, when you're looking at a black hole of 450 million, unfortunately adding another 3 million to it to make sure that our workforce you know, the people who empty the bins and sweep the streets and cut the grass and look after the vulnerable elderly and the vulnerable young don't get punished as a result of what's happened. You know, it wasn't those men and women that have caused the bankruptcy of the council, and they shouldn't be made to suffer for it. And frankly, you know, they've been waiting long enough. This should have been implemented months and months ago. So I think any further hesitation would be wrong. So on that narrow point, I would, if I can, agree with you and move implementation of the NJC award in year.
Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Hugh.
Sorry.
Councillor Arnold.
Sorry, Chair. I thought you was pointing to me there. Yeah, I mean, I would have been open to a conversation about partial implementation, but overall I agree. It's crazy. At the end of the day, at the end of the contract, we need to be meeting NJC levels anyway, and morally it's wrong to defer, I feel, for all the reasons that have been said, and just moving it down the road just creates a problem for later. What's the point of that?
Any comments or questions? Okay, I've got a couple of questions before we move to there. Can I just clarify? Oh, sorry. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Chair. Only to say I agree with our colleagues in the room. Deferring this is just going to cause problems. The conditional one, the third option, I must admit, I thought could work, but it's not fair. I think we've got to implement this now and get it up to the right level, like Councillor Kent, for the workers here. They're not to blame for this, so that's my thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, that is where I think at the moment, I tell you where I am at the moment, obviously defer. I've still got some questions around the implementation of the partial, and I take the Councillor Kent's views completely, and I think that sounds sensible, but I just want to just tease that item there, and I'd like to ask some questions about some other options, what we're doing and how we're ongoing, how we solve what Councillor Kent has said was that this is a year late. How can we actually get ahead of the game on this and negotiations and what we can do? But it does sound confusing to me that he's saying only saves 200,000. I know it's only 200,000. That's quite a lot, considering a pennies count in this. Every penny counts to actually make sure we actually fund the budget, and you count the pennies and you end up with quite a lot of money at the end of this. But 200,000 sounds extremely low for 300 full-time equivalent staff.
Yeah, I can understand that. So the way that, because we applied a pay increase, so we've applied a pay increase to our scales, the people that earn the most would have, the 2.25% for them would have represented a much higher figure. So it's closer to the 1925. So the difference between what they already had and what they will receive under the NJC award is much smaller than those staff at the lower ends of the bands.
And if we defer, we're only deferring that 218,000 for a year because we'd have to pay that as part of the 5-year deal.
Yeah, so for next year, if we deferred implementation for part of it, we would then have to pay the top up next year and then apply whatever award we're going to plan to do next year.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a very. If it was deferring, we would defer. It's a quite substantial amount, but deferring 218 seems very small. And there's still negotiations to deal with the unions and the staff for that. So even if we accept tonight or recommend the partial, that's still not a done deal sitting here tonight.
No, the partial one would be complex because we would have to negotiate a clause within the agreement that requires us to apply it consistently across the whole pay scale. If I'm honest, I don't think the trade unions would be cooperative, and we would potentially end up in the same position for a smaller amount. And also the impact on those groups of staff, obviously, with retention would be difficult. But it's an option, but it is just a 1 year £200,000, we would have to make up the pay next year to meet the overall requirement of the collective agreement.
Thank you for that. I've just got another question about how ongoing arrangements, because as the councillor said, that this is a long time coming, and it now gets more complicated in the financial situation the council is in. But how can we? And I've mentioned as leaders when I took over that everything's not on the table. That you've heard a couple of times, Councillor Warren, I've said that, and that does mean everything. And obviously, staff is a major element of our council. And what procedures are we going to do? One, to give staff confidence that pay policy comes, and two, that we've got in value for money in the staff awards and how we're going to negotiation that we've got at the end of a deal. What are review arrangements of our staff in pay are we going to do? And I see the commissioners have recommended a full pay review. And how do we, if we vote for that tonight, how can we make sure that that comes back to here and there's ongoing conversations through General Services, full council of it, because we can't leave this ongoing. We have some, I know I don't want to control of pay, and it's not our job as councillors, but we've got to have some control that it's going to work, and we're having a full look at all pay policy, and we're implementing at time, because like justice late denied, like is justice denied, justice late or something like that. And if we're paying this late, people want certainty in their lives of what their pay is, and we can't keep this going. And we need to then make sure that we're doing a good job for council, and we're actually understanding where our pay is and what we're doing, making sure that paying the right figures and the right time, we've got the right staff. How can we deliver that?
I think there were quite a few questions in there. I'll try and deal with all of them. So we're not late with our pay policy. We did our pay policy in line with the statutory requirements. It was agreed by council in February and implemented from the 1st of April. What's come very, very late is the NJC negotiations and outcome for the current year. Now, we haven't been in a position before where the pay award that we have applied in the council was so significantly different from the national position. So we've never been in a position where the trade unions have said, hang on a minute, I know we agreed and we've implemented 3%, 2%, whatever. Nationally, they've applied 10%. So we've not had that scenario before, but we're not late with our policy. But where we have been slower is obviously the NJC agreement was reached in November. So some councils have paid that in December. Nobody paid it before November because it wasn't a reached agreement till then. So technically we're a couple of months behind. I think in the circumstances and the discussions and the analysis that has needed to go on to determine the impact of this, I would have liked it to be sooner, but that's where we are, and we've had to consider the financial context. In terms of moving forward, the governance of our pay policy at present is our existing collective agreement. And the pay awards that are recommended through our pay policy to council every February are on the basis of the independent market assessment. There's other factors involved, and the NJC award is one that we would reference into, or the independent market assessment would reference into. We haven't had that for this current year. It was very, very late. They were in dispute. There was a big difference between what was being claimed and what was being offered. So we do have a governance around our pay policy at the present time. We've got one more year of that. Next year, I can absolutely tell to the committee at the moment, will be complex because it is our 5th year of the collective agreement. So in making this, if we agree this award, it makes it slightly less complex, but our independent assessment is still trying to make a recommendation on pay to us at the current time, and we will be ahead of national pay negotiations. We haven't even had the claims in yet for trade unions for next year's pay. So managing next year might require some in-year discussions at this committee and then potentially a change going through council again next year. We can only take a pay policy in February based upon our best knowledge at the time. And there is a higher increase built into the MTFS for next year based on the current market conditions, our expectation. However, if nationally another fixed rate is agreed, that will have implications for us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just that this is unbudgeted in last year's, and that's what concerns me. So we've got to have it be making sure we're ahead of the game to a point and actually have allowances in the budgets of where we're going for pay policy. As well as that, my concern is that we need a review of all pay policy. We're coming to the end of that. So how making sure that item 1.3, I think, is a really important thing for moving forward, to give certainty all round if we can actually move forward. But Councillor Kent, you before I hog this.
No, I think you're right. What 1.3 is crucial, but I have to say I don't understand 1.3. It's there as a recommendation. I don't think we're actually being recommended there to do anything. So I'd just like to tease out, if I can, what the ask is of this committee around 1.3.
Jackie.
1.3 is recommending to the committee for agreement that we conduct a review of pay and allowances and essentially employee costs. And that's been recommended and supported by the Commissioner. What that actually entails, I should be brutally honest, is not that clear at the moment. We introduced in 2019 the new pay scales that did away with our previous pay scales that were unsafe and unsustainable, to be honest. So we finally got to the point 5 years later where our new pay scales have embedded and are fully embedded. If we want to review pay scales as part of that, then that's a big renegotiation with the trade unions. But I think we need to look at this in the round. So this is not just potentially about reviewing pay levels, but it's also about reviewing all of the other elements that make up the rewards package. So allowances, expenses. There's all the other elements that actually make up some of those. We did review these year before last. So the majority of them were reviewed as part of the ongoing agreement around the pay review. So we've rationalised and reduced some of our allowances, and they had an impact, and we ended up in industrial dispute with the trade unions. However, we reached an agreement, and they were all reviewed. So I think initially it would probably be a debate at this group, at this meeting, in terms of what actually you would like to achieve from a pay review, and then we can sort of that can inform how we take that forward. They are big undertakings, a pay review, so we would need to be clear about the terms of reference and what we're trying to achieve.
Councillor Kent.
So I'll come back to it. The first recommendation, General Services Committee are asked to consider. So we're asked to do something. The second, if appropriate, make a recommendation. So again, we're asked to do something. The third paragraph just tells us that the Commissioner is recommending a full review of pay arrangements is carried out. It's not asking us to agree to a full review of pay arrangements. It says an appropriate oversight arrangement for decision making will need to be agreed. It's not asking us to agree or to try and develop or put together whatever that oversight is. And I guess my question is that if members decide that we don't want to back a full review of pay arrangements, is this something that the Commissioner will insist on and push ahead with regardless? I'm just curious that this recommendation doesn't ask this committee to do anything this evening. So I'm just a bit curious as to why it's there and why it's there in that form.
Is that to me or to Jackie?
That is to anybody who may wish to comment.
I'll start with Jackie, and I may come back.
It's, yeah, note the comments and apologies that it's not 100% clear. It's in the context of the financial situation, we have to look at everything that is causing pressure on the budgets. This is an unfunded increase, an unbudgeted increase that potentially needs to be mitigated by any route we can take in relation to any other options within the reward package. I think what might be easier is if, from what I've heard, is that General Services Committee can say they support a review of pay. You are part of that review process. This was the committee that agreed the previous pay review and agreed the new salary scales that then actually went into the pay policy from 2019. So this group would be part of the governance of doing that. But in relation to the pay review, I can't at this point in time give you an indication of what the scope and breadth of that would be.
I think Councillor Kent hit the nail on the head about where the steer is going to this, but it's obviously a steer that I've mentioned in full council numerous times, that everything should be reviewed at this point to make sure. That doesn't mean to say there's changes in pay. What it does mean to say is that we've viewed it, made sure we've done that and looked on in there, and we've moved on. It's just like everything else we've looked at and we've proved and proved to government that we've looked at this and there isn't nothing, or there is. And I'm happy to change the recommendations to make it just like that. And then this needs to come back to this committee, the terms of reference, I think, of what that includes and what that was. And I think it's just there to make sure that what I've said up for council right from day one is that everything should be looked and reviewed. That doesn't mean to say that there's going to be changes or there is changes. We just want to review things, because if it's 2-3 years ago, it's mostly up to date. But should that something we should be left when it's actually a lot of our funding, most of our money is in salaries? We need to make sure that we've looked under that stone. Councillor Kent, do you want to come back, or did you move on to Councillor Worrell?
I'll come back later if that's all right.
Councillor.
Thank you. Jackie, it wouldn't be unusual, though, would it, to have this policy reviewed on, regular occasions? So we've reviewed it in the past, and it's not unusual that, I work for an organisation where we go through this process maybe once every 4 years or so, and, salaries go up and down. And new jobs would be advertised at a difference. Doesn't mean anyone's getting a pay drop. It could well be that people are just held at a level until people within the organisation come up. So I think that it is prudent that we should look at this in the future, and I think that the inspectors are right to make us have a look at this, because I think that there's some jobs in here that pay extremely, extremely well that are not in, and you wouldn't get that out in other organisations. So I think that, it may be that we have had a little bit of a runaway train and too many officers are on too many high bandings, and it does need looking at. It's the same as when we're looking at the £2,000. The £2,000 to somebody on the bottom of a scale, that is going to make huge amounts of difference, whether they can turn their heating on. To others, they're not going to notice much about it. So I think that it's right that we do look at salary bandings across the piece. I haven't got a problem with that coming here in the future and having that debate.
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. That was a very helpful intervention. I'll come to Councillor Arnold, and then I'll come to the office, John Jones, after you. So you've got comments, and John wants to comment.
Yeah, I think Councillor Worrell's covered a lot of it anyway. I was going to say, I know pay scales got reviewed, allowances got reviewed, but if the contract is coming to an end next year, it makes sense to review all of those allowances and those pay scales again to me, and do it thoroughly ready to set for the next 5 years. And, Councillor Kent's right, I think, and you've said we'll get stronger wording around that, because I think members do recommend that we do this.
John?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And my apologies for not being there in person this evening. My interpretation of the third recommendation, and it is an interpretation, is that we need a clear structure going forward with clear terms of reference to carry out a full review of the pay arrangements. That's what my interpretation in a nutshell is. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can have back a future meeting, a general services, and a full review means a full review of everything, and including that and making sure that the terms of reference can come back to this at this point. Councillor Kent, did you want to come back on that?
I think I'm happy to support a full review, but to make it clear from the outset that supporting a review does not mean that we will endorse and back the findings of that review.
Quite true. No, we shouldn't be held to that. You don't know what a review will find, and then some of the unpalatable. My son may be better, like what Councillor Warren just said. So I think a review is there's nothing to be afraid about reviewing things. It's only good practice.
In which case we would support. I would just remind everybody that when we agreed to a review 3-4 years ago now, it was used as a stick to beat us with when we didn't agree with the outcome of that review.
I'm going to hold to. You've got my words over and over again. I know it's very hard to find some words on certain things I don't talk about because I'm very quiet on things I don't agree with. I don't want to have public spats. But I want to bring through here. It shouldn't be one group or the other. If I'm whoever's sitting as leader in when this review is finished. And I know how long it took. A long time, the last review. Okay, so then it should be across the board, and I think we've got to get some sort of agreement across us, because that's what the government wants to see, and what the commissioners want to see. And I'm very that I give you that undertaking that we shouldn't be used to beat each other up on. We've got to stop that. Councillor Johnson.
Would it not help at all if that paragraph was to end with will need to be agreed by General Services Committee or at General Services Committee? It just gives us giving us something to do.
I'm going to look at John or Matt, to see if we can, if you want to firm this up, to make sure Councillor Kent's observations that it was recommending something, we can actually say we own that, and that view should come here with terms of reference. Or is that good enough that you've understood the gist of this conversation we've been having?
Chairman, I think we've got a clear indication of what you want. We will report you with a clear structure, terms of reference, and the ability for the committee. The terms of reference will set out what the committee will be expected to do and what the outcomes, how you will deal with the outcome of the review. So I think when you get the terms of reference, that will be explicit, and I think it will cover the points that's been raised this evening.
As members happy with that? Okay. I will, talking about speed, so when will this be coming back, the terms of reference? As we had timescales, Jackie?
I think in terms of timescales, we probably would aim for March at the earliest, because we've got, essentially, we're retaking the current year's pay policy to January Council, and then we're taking next year's pay policy to February Council. So it would be useful to get through those two processes first before we come back with a proposed terms of reference for pay review.
I take that, but I think we should be able to manage I understand that, but that early March, because it seems to drag on then, and we're going into an election season, and then PERDA. I think we're just to get in that means that you've got a good steer from the committee before then, and I'm worried that it drops. Then I can see surely your department could manage that very quickly between the two. I know it's I'm juggling the ball, but we can see if we get to around the time, sometime in early February, I think is a good time. Before then, that gives us plenty of time. I think an update before then to members outside here to make sure we're on time, on target, because I'm just worried it gets closer and closer to PERDA, the closer to them, and then there's nothing happening, let's be honest. And then we lose time on this.
I can take it away. I'll be honest with you in terms of the resources available. Early February is 2 weeks, and that'll be very, very difficult to turn it around in that time as well. I've also got to manage the
misspoke.
messaging.
End of February. I see the February, but I don't want to go into March. That's what I'm trying to get something back here, or an update of where this is and what the terms look like is as quick as possible to make sure that we're members are fully aware of where this is and the terms are amicable for everyone here. Thank you. Right, with that, I think we do agree as members, and that the full information of the agreement should be implemented, and recommend that to council. So that is option 1. I would. Is it no? Is it? We're looking now. 1. No, I'm looking. No, it's not labelled. That's what I'm just making sure that the recommendation is the right recommendation, because it's not in options. It's there.
Implement the NJC award in year.
3.2. We implement. So recommendation is to 3.2. To implement the NJC award in year is our recommendation to full council. Okay, thank you. And then we go to, and then we accept the appropriate program council to revise pay policy, and then 1.3 we've just had a longer discussion about. Are we okay with that? So, are you happy with that, John or Matt? Yes. Okay. With that, I will close this meeting at 18:37. Thank you very much.